that's where the job has tended to be and has probably floated around between those departments. But as time has gone on, and over the last number of years, as the increased awareness and the profile of data protection has risen here, it's gotten a bit more serious. As we can see with the pending legislation, it's really going to find a home now, that it's going to have to, not be hopping around as such, and a home that's going to have the opportunity to maximise its resources to be able to do its job efficiently. In terms of, what we might do going forward in J&J, we're still sort of we're still working on our position paper, really for what way the structure might be, because it's such a large and complex company.
And it's many companies, right?
And it's many companies, yeah. I mean, just to give you a flavour of the current structure, the Chief Compliance Officer, who's based in New Jersey, is really the owner of Privacy. And the Chief Privacy Officer, who is ultimately my boss, reports directly into him.
Okay.
And then in the USA and in the EMEA region and in Asia, we have directors of privacy.
Okay.
And then I work in the pharmaceutical sector as a regional manager, reporting into that director of privacy. And in each of the sectors that Johnson & Johnson has a business, we have pharma, we have consumer, and we have medical devices. There are regional managers as well. Mm-hmm. And in the countries where we operate, where those businesses are, like we have 3 of them here in Ireland, the 3 sectors here in Ireland, there would be what we call privacy liaisons. And some of those are full-time. Depending on the country that you're in, we might see it as a high-risk country. Mm-hmm. That may be because there's a lot of work being done there where we're processing the data of patients or individuals or employees, or it may be that the data protection authority that is actually overseeing that country is maybe perceived as being a bit more conservative compared to some of the other countries we operate in. Some of those privacy liaisons are kind of full-time. Some of them would only maybe spend half their time working on privacy, and they may be working on healthcare compliance as well. So going forward with the requirements under the legislation, there's a bit of flexibility really in terms of what way our position might evolve as it regards a DPO or DPO structure. We probably will have the ability to do it, but we'll have to be able to tweak a few things and provide some extra resources, like training to those liaisons who aren't full-time ones, for example.
And so you'd be interacting with. So going back to Dennis's point there, talking about the independence of the DPO, and that's also provisioned under the GDPR. Do you see that as a potential issue with regards to the strategic direction of companies? I mean, do you think there's a conflict between the independence of a DPO with, say, direction given by the board of directors, for example? So, like, say, a CPO. Because obviously some people believe there's a certain conflict between, or there's a conflict for a DPO in order to be independent and protect the rights of the data subject with regards to how does a DPO, in effect, support all organizational decisions when they have to be independent of those decisions to do their job efficiently?
Well, ultimately, I guess it's an assessment of each company and its size and organisation. I mean, in J&J, it's quite complex. Mm-hmm. If you have a smaller SME or a smaller business, perhaps here in Ireland, it'll be a lot easier to, set yourself up in terms of reporting lines. I don't think necessarily DPO role would have to report into the board of directors or report into the CEO, but it would certainly need to have access to senior management in order to be able to inform them of decisions or get advice on decisions that they're making in relation to customers or consumers or patients, whoever it might be, for example, on behalf of the business, but always being mindful that those interests are the interests that they need to protect first, but also keep in mind, the business and the strategy going forward and trying to weigh up those two. it's an interesting scenario. I think when it comes to DPOs in terms of conflict of interest, it's if they're going to be located in an IT department or in a business function, there's more likely to be conflict. Maybe less so when they're separated or working in a silo to a certain extent with access to senior management, because
which is actually the case in Germany. A lot of the DPOs
which is the case in Germany, but which I kind of find has been useful really to, not largely make decisions which, should influence what way you will go with IT, or just to satisfy a request from your IT manager necessarily, but, really to be able to be standalone, to be able to go in, talk at board meetings, give updates, give advice, answer, questions or investigations that might come from the board, whether it's internally or externally. But, to be able to, I would say, to be able to sort of leverage the kind of independence, and maybe position itself as something that can be, for the good of the company. Ultimately, there's one I used to always put out there, and it can be seen in some of the cases that have been taken in the last 12 to 24 months here in Ireland. Like, directors are now liable, so they kind of have to be able to understand that, data privacy is important, and the people who are occupying the roles of data protection officer play an important role, and we have to sit up and listen, and they have to be able to sit out there and work and try and not get themselves into positions of conflict.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting if you look at the research that was launched just recently in advance of the Data Summit, which was carried out by the company iReach on behalf of the Taoiseach's department, where they came to the conclusion that one of the finding statistics of the research was that 66% of Irish companies were literally unaware of the GDPR and the importance of the obligations on the GDPR. Do you think that is something that will be turned around fairly quickly, or do you think that's something that remains? I mean, obviously this is a trend that we're seeing across Europe as well. So.
I mean, I think it helps. Like, we have events that have been organised by the Department of Taoiseach, events like today.
Because also,
because it is raising awareness. We have a lot of high-profile companies who are quite active in the data protection sphere, globally located here in Dublin, who are doing lots of things which sometimes are challenged, other times are not, but they're being innovative, and that all helps raise awareness. But I think at this stage, it may be still the perception that it's too early to worry about this yet by a lot of companies. I mean, that's coming through in those survey results. It might be that come the turn of the new year, when budgets are, have just been completed, and that they might be looking then to see, well, we can put something in place there because we probably need to do so.
Right. Yeah.
Whether it's a case of just waiting and see, I don't know. Perhaps maybe the first sort of action taken by a regulatory authority under the new regime, when it comes into effect in relation to not appointing a DPO, might shake people up fairly quickly.
Absolutely.
In terms of mobilising themselves to get the role sorted.
And I think Helen Dixon was quite clear on that today, even finishing off her keynote, where she said the Irish Regulatory Authority was looking forward to being ready for May 2018, ready to enforce the GDPR.
I think if you don't appoint a DPO, it's going to be a straightaway trigger that clearly you're not compliant. It's the most basic thing you can do for compliance.
Right.
I know, it's quite possible that when she's looking around who is compliant with GDPR, the first thing she may look at is, well, if you have to appoint a DPO under the GDPR and you haven't done so, then I would say that would be very obvious in terms of their assessment of where they're going to look. Because if you don't have a DPO, then you're clearly not doing anything else. Right. So I think in that sense, it may be quite a significant signifier to her. Well, it will be a very significant signifier to her of just saying who has not communicated to me that they have a DPO. Yeah. So I would imagine she may well do an assessment along those lines, very quickly, very early on, because it is something you have to do. And if you're not doing it, obviously, you're not appointing a DPO, how would you be complying with anything else?
I'd suggest that under her current responsibilities or powers to audit businesses, if any business or company has been audited here, you'll get a letter in advance, and the scope of the audit will be outlined. You may or may not have a designated point of contact in terms of data protection at the moment, but that would certainly be one of the things that would come under scope or the radar in terms of anybody who might get audited next year, because it's obviously a requirement under the regulation to have one.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to come back to the question of independence that we're talking about specifically through your experience in the private sector, and maybe have a little look at the public sector.
Yeah.
And also, can you maybe outline, certainly in your understanding and experience of the public sector and what's been happening in Ireland, maybe further afield, I mean, how do you see reporting lines for DPOs within the public sector, and is independence an issue in that respect as well?
Independence in the public sector should be relatively straightforward to manage, because essentially if you're appointed within the public sector, you'll have a legal obligation to be independent. And at that stage, that'll basically be an obligation upon you, and upon you to be independent, and upon the organisation which you're part of to treat you as an independent person. In terms of the seniority, I think it would be quite interesting, because the public sector is, of course, very hierarchical. So in terms of the DPO, I'd imagine they'll be appointed within the public sector, the equivalent of a principal officer level. So they're reporting into the highest level of management, which is a senior level, reporting directly into the highest level. So our chief superintendent in the Guards, our colonel, lieutenant colonel in the Army. So it will be quite a senior level in terms of where the DPO will be. In terms of the independence, I mean, there are a lot of very interesting issues about independence. And I think this really comes down to the element of they have to have professional qualities. The idea is that they are to be professionals, privacy professionals. And one of the distinctive features of a privacy professional is that if they don't perform to certain standards, they can then be subject to certain sanctions. Unfortunately, the GDPR doesn't explain how that profession is meant to operate. And that, I think, will be one of the very interesting issues to be dealt with in the coming years over, I think we were talking about this earlier, about what happens if you have a DPO who simply doesn't do their job, because they are independent. So if they're dismissed, not on the grounds in breach of it, not for any other ground, but simply on the basis that they're not competent or they're not showing up for work or something like that, they will, of course, argue that their independence has been infringed. So who's going to resolve that dispute? Are you going to go to the DPC? Are you going to the Employment Appeals Tribunal? They'll be, I think, bemused to be getting this question. Do you go to the courts? And the body that normally resolves that, an issue of professional competence, is the professional association. If you're accused of being an incompetent solicitor, you go to the Law Society. If you're accused of being an incompetent doctor, it goes before the Irish Medical Council. If you're accused of being an incompetent DPO, where does that question go? That's going to be one of the very, very interesting questions we're going to be looking at. I think that's going to come up in the next few years. That it's as privacy becomes a profession, then the profession of privacy, like the DPO, will have to demonstrate professional qualities. And that's going to be very, very interesting.
So how do we combat potential incompetence of a position that's not really governed? Is it about training? Is it about certification?
At the initial stage, it's certification. Yeah. Getting yourself trained, getting yourself certified. You have to have, as you know, expert knowledge, not just of law. I know there was a very interesting discussion on the IAPP website about people saying, do you need to be a lawyer to be a DPO? You clearly don't need to be a lawyer. Correct. It would, in a sense, be nicer if you had to be a lawyer, because at least you do one skill set. The skill set required for DPO is very, very broad.
It's very broad.
It's legal knowledge. You have to be expert knowledge of data protection, and you have to do data security,
business continuity.
Yes. Yeah. All of the skills to perform your tasks. And the tasks of DPO are exacting. I mean, I think there's this view of the DPO, and I think it comes up from this element of it's a new role. But if you look at the tasks of the DPO in the GDPR, you have to inform and advise the controller. You have to monitor compliance on things like the assignment of responsibilities. That's an exacting task to somebody to monitor how responsibilities are being assigned within their employer. You have to provide advice. You have to advise on things like the data protection impact assessment, which is going to be one of the key one of the key obligations being imposed on the data controller. You have to cooperate with the supervisory authority, and you have to act as a contact point. So it's, I mean, there's a tough set of skills, and there's a specific requirement in there to have due regard to risk.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a lot of organisations...
Article 38, isn't it?
Yeah, at the end, yeah, in terms of the very last, was Article 38, 39, that you have to have due regard to risk. So you need expertise, not just in law, not just in data protection, all things like risk, technology. It's a very, very exciting
Processing,
role.
IT processing.
Yeah.
So are we saying here that that is such a skill set that, or such a broad skill set that it's difficult to find in one particular person? I mean, do you see ultimately the DPO role in so much as a series of functions within an organisation with perhaps a data protection lead? I don't know. Do you have a view on that, Alan? I mean, do you think, let's take Johnson & Johnson, do you think there will just be a series of DPOs, or will there be a team under a CPO or a Chief Privacy Officer? Or, you know, is there a particular way you think this works best? Either one of you?
Well, maybe to extend a little bit further on the fact that, you know, maybe having an intimate knowledge of data protection law and practice and business processes and IT and risk and stuff like that. There's also some basic skill sets that are really important to have, and that's being able to, you know, listen and communicate and being able to translate the technical into the simple. You know, a lot of the stuff that you might be doing with your IT department and the processes and the systems that are put in place, which are, you know, responsible for data integrity and security and things like that, you know, they need to be, you know, translated into more simpler language so you can communicate with other employees,
other stakeholders,
you know, whether it's in legal or marketing or whatever that might be, but also to your customers, you know, to people, the general public, when you're going to be doing that, when you're answering queries that come in, and doing it, I suppose, perhaps with information you might put on your public-facing notices on websites. So those sort of skill sets are important. But being able to build relationships, good working relationships with your IT colleagues, you know, your design colleagues, if it's, you know, a company you're working in where there's engineering in that, you know, being able to also work well with your marketing colleagues. I know from past experience working across the way when O2 was in operation here before it was bought by 3, I had a go-to person on the technology side for a lot of things in terms of products and services that the company were launching, because we needed to get an understanding of what that means from a data protection perspective.
So those support services were there. So there were identified resources within the organisation that assisted you in your job.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say. I would probably go and ask them. You know,
chase them.
Some people would have said I chased, all right, or harassed in some instances. But really, I suppose it's the shared aim or goal. I mean, obviously, you want to be able to launch a product or service that's successful, but it needs to be compliant. And, you know, certainly when it comes to privacy and the position the Data Protection Commissioner has here now, that's certainly one of the things, you know, companies who are hoping to be successful with their products and services, if there's a privacy element to be considered, they'll give it due consideration. And I suppose that's ultimately what one of the things is when it comes to the GDPR itself.
Just I'd like to get both your views on, do you think there's enough flexibility within the GDPR to allow businesses to develop different models of DPO responsibilities? I mean, obviously there's provisions within the GDPR that allow for shared DPOs as well as external outsourcing of DPOs. To your earlier point, there's actually nothing in the GDPR that says that a DPO needs to be a lawyer.
No.
But obviously there is a very strong emphasis placed on an understanding of law and policy data protection wherever that's applicable. But do you think then there's a certain flexibility? Do you think we can have multiple models of how the DPO, will that ease up the requirements for the numbers of DPOs that we claim will be required in Europe? We've done a fair amount of research also at the IPP, which suggests that at a very minimum, we will require at least 28,000 DPOs in Europe. And we think that figure is relatively conservative. Yeah. And even with the extra or with the extra territorial application, we think that number globally is 75,000 DPOs.
Right.
So, I mean, how do you see?
Yeah, I
I mean,
mean-
we're not going to find those people per se between now and 2018. I think that's probably unrealistic. I mean, you need to be finding them now to be training them up to be efficient and effective for when the 25th of May 2018 comes about.
Yeah, well, I mean, in J&J we've been quite a while now looking at what we need to do really in order to be ready for May 2018, and we've been looking at lots of different scenarios. I suppose the key thing really in terms of a complex structure that's global for us, for example, is that there's an element of flexibility there that, you know, as long as you appoint somebody who performs the tasks that are required and can represent all the entities, including those entities that are outside of the Europe, but who are monitoring, you know, citizens' data or processing citizens' data within the EU. That is the very case with a lot of our patient programs and clinical trials. You know, that requirement will be met by having, you know, bits of responsibility, whether it may be in a country or in a cluster of countries or in a sector, as long as it's feeding back up into that one point of contact, whoever that might be, who's going to act on behalf of the organisation.
As long as they're accessible, those points are accessible.
Yeah, exactly, and accessible to the regulatory authorities also.
Dennis,
Yeah, no, I think it's going to have to be a flexible skill set because the needs are going to be so different. So, I mean, you take the example of a car dealership, a very different need to, say, a social media company.
Right.
And so there's going to have to be flexibility there, definitely. And I think there's going to be, and again, there's, with regard to the issue of getting a DPO with this very broad range of skills, yeah, I mean, you're going to have DPOs who'll be maybe expert in one particular area. It could be law, it could be technology, but they're then going to need the backup in those other areas to allow them to do their job. Otherwise, you'll have to get quite large teams in certain countries because it is going to be very hard to say one person can have such a broad range of skills and certainly be an expert in all of them.
Well, one of the things we're looking at is trying to develop subject matter experts within the global privacy team. So one or two individuals who would specialise in breach notification handling.
globally or regionally?
Well, regionally, because I guess breaches in the States
Would be
would
different,
maybe fall foul to different regulation than it would here. But they're like
it's not like virtual teams sitting. Per se.
yeah, and they could work together and share from their experiences. You know, the same with data protection impact assessments. You know, subject matter experts in that. You know, maybe data transfers as well. That kind of stuff. You know, so that for the structure that we might want to end up with, we should be in a position perhaps to cover all bases.
Right.
You know, and if you have individuals who are willing to become subject matter experts and share that knowledge, it might work well for areas where there might be still some gaps in that space in some countries where we might have a presence and an issue arises.
Right.
Yeah, no, I think I think, but again, it's the level of flexibility. That's that is what I think you'll see more and more firms doing, of having people specialising in particular areas, and feeding into a single system.
So, do you think, following on from that, is it realistic to think that a DPO role can be performed by a third party? So, do you think it's feasible to outsource, given the need to understand business culture, business models, organizational behavior? Can somebody sitting outside the organization have enough impact and influence within an organization? And maybe this depends on whether whether the services are being offered to an SME or a large, medium-sized enterprise or a multinational. I think it might be different, but do you think we can, outsource the DPO role with a sufficient level of understanding and also for risk-based approaches?
I think there's a couple of big questions there of the risk. Basically, there's two risks there. One is the risk. There's a liability there. That I personally have had a few conversations about this with fellow lawyers. How do you manage the liability? And if you're external, what are the sort of external liabilities for? I think that's I think that is a challenging risk to people to manage in terms of the external DPO. And I think if you look at the requirements, it is, of course, to need a DPO, you have to be, your core activities consist of regular systemic monitoring of data subjects, or your core activities, if you're not a public body, core activity consists of processing a large scale of special categories of data. So you're looking at businesses that are already processing large amounts. Your core activities are devoted to data processing. And in that situation, so your business is about processing personal data, how happy are you going to be to get in somebody externally from, say, a big professional services firm and have them get that sort of intimate understanding of how your business is operating? Because you are really at that stage giving somebody, the keys to the car in terms of your business. You're telling them exactly how your business runs. And if they're a professional company with relationships with maybe hundreds of other companies, including potentially your competitors, how comfortable are you going to be with that? I think my own feeling on this, I know it's possible to have external DPOs, and I think that it will be suitable in some situations. But I think in general, I think a lot of firms will look long and hard at this, and as DPO becomes
more strategic or
more strategic, as data becomes a more strategic asset.
Typically, you say you don't outsource strategic functions; you only outsource non-strategic functions. So, is there a paradigm there that you need to look at?
It is a challenge. The other thing that might dictate your decision is it might be easier from a cost perspective to recruit somebody into a privacy role rather than going outsourcing it to a third party who you're probably going to pay a lot of money to.
Sure.
And if that individual who you end up recruiting, can share those sort of share that sort of profile we talked about, those sort of characteristics of and the knowledge and the skill set, you should be fine. I would suggest. It has worked. I mean, because it's in law in Germany, so it would seem to be, I suppose, perhaps a decent benchmark, because Germany would be seen as fairly tough when it comes to data protection laws. But really, it's down to, I suppose, assessing your own business needs and the size of your business and budget, really, about whether you can go.
So one size doesn't fit all.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Maybe you could end up getting somebody in part-time, for example, a couple of days a week, and maybe they might be willing to train that sort of privacy person up, or use it as a development opportunity for a compliance person in your organisation, perhaps. Maybe that might be the way that it works.
In your knowledge, any differentiation for the public sector on that front, outsourcing or not?
I would expect that there's a big obligation on the public sector to appoint DPOs.
It's a mandatory requirement.
Mandatory requirement.
Under the GDPR.
And there's going to have to be a lot of them. I would imagine within the public sector, you can, of course, centralise, depending on the GDPR does seem to allow public sector organisations to maybe consolidate a number of organisations to have a single DPO. So I think you'll be seeing, I've got to certainly see how that would happen. Yeah. But it is, within the Irish system, all government departments are, separate. So I think there's going to be a very significant obligation on the state to appoint
state agencies as well.
State agencies, yeah. Hospitals, as a class. I mean, given the very diffuse nature of the HSE, there's a lot of hospitals in Ireland, and as you know, about various issues about ownership and all the rest. So that's going to be very interesting to see how that's going to work out, and where you're going to get all those DPOs for all those hospitals and all those different medical functions. Because, of course, hospitals, by their very nature, process vast amounts of sensitive personal data. Yeah. So, if you just look at something like the medical sector, it is going to be a very, very significant issue. Yeah. Where do you get those DPOs for, and how do you resource them? I do think there is a very important element there of providing support to the DPOs in terms of, even if you get one DPO who is sufficiently well qualified and is well enough trained, they will need support in other areas. So I think that's going to be very, very interesting to see how that's applied, across different sectors.
Well, should we just maybe concluding statement from yourself, and then one from Dennis, and we'll open the floor because we only have really 10 to 12 minutes left. So anything that comes to mind that you, apart from saying don't panic? You hear that a lot on the privacy circuit, telling everybody don't panic, but is there anything you think, any words of wisdom you'd like to leave everybody with today?
I would say to everybody here today that you've got to run out the door and start knocking on recruitment agencies' doors tomorrow to find me a data protection officer, because it is a role that it's a little bit specialised, but there is time to prepare. I think what you need to assess, or your business or your organisation needs to assess, really is where you're going in terms of your strategy with your products and services, and if you're processing a lot of data that is belonging to customers and things like that, where you're going to fall under the requirements to have a DPO. You just got to assess then, right, what size DPO operation you want to implement. Should it be full-time? Should it be part-time? Should it be outside? Is it worth training up somebody now, taking on board some training and education
for existing staff members?
Get your certification. Maybe look within your legal and risk teams already. Somebody wants to, take up a new position if it's opened up within the organisation. Look at it that way, and really, try and make sure that whatever decision you do make, you get it endorsed by your CEO or your board or your senior management, because really you'll also need their backing to be
you need the buy-in from
the
senior management.
Yeah, especially if that person is going to be given independence to go about their duties.
Yeah. Okay. Dennis, anything you'd like to add to that?
I just echo all of those statements there. And I mean, I think it does require a fundamental redesign of your corporate governance structures, because you're going to get this person, you're going to have to create this role of a person who's going to be independent. Once you put them into that role, it's going to be challenging, I think, from a legal perspective, to remove them on whatever ground. So once you get, you need to carefully design the role. You need, on the one hand, a DPO, and who's going to interact with the DPO. You have to think about both sides of that coin. And then you have to decide where those functions are going to sit within your organisation. I think it's going to be a very, very significant decision for a lot of people to make, particularly if they're, if you're in a business that needs to appoint a DPO, then you are by definition in a business where personal data processing is going to be core to your activities. So you need to be very careful think very clearly about where is that function going to sit, how is that function going to interact with the rest of the organisation. And then the final question you have to think is who's going to perform that function. But they're all big challenges. I would hope that people wouldn't wait until the sort of 3-month spring of next year before they start thinking about it. Because you're not going to be able to...
If you're going to go recruiting, competition is going to be...
it's going to be for a shortage.
There might be a shortage.
There might be a shortage at that stage. But also, if you're just beginning to think about how you're going to restructure your organisation, I mean, that's a big question. How are you going to give this guy the sort of access they have, this person,
and
the resources they need, the resources
as well.
And again, I think people aren't really thinking about the other side of the coin.
It might need a change in culture, which takes time.
Yeah, I mean, this could be driving organisational change as well as behavioural change within organisations, as well as in relationships with consumers and customers. So it's significant as well.
Yeah, it's a very significant change. I wouldn't minimise the significance of this change.
So if we feel there is sort of a lack of supply of potential candidates or recruits for DPO roles, do you think it's also, as Alan was saying, do you think it's wise to look in-house and try and identify either one or two people to sort of fulfill the DPO? Well, is that a easier access to filling those 28,000 roles that we're going to need?
I think that is the logical, because I think one of the key things certainly I encounter is the main thing is to get somebody who understands the organisation.
Exactly.
That's exactly the advantage of going inside rather than out.
And they understand, they already have the relationships that Lily wants somebody who understands the organisation, already has pre-existing relationships and pre-existing relationship within the organisation, reputation within the organisation, and simply train them up into the role. I think the idea of getting an outsider where they have to build up their understanding of the organisation and build up their own relationships, I think that's going to be very, very challenging. I mean, we have, what is it at this stage, 9 months left, getting on for 9 months, 10 months left.
Yeah, 10 months left.
10 months left. So it's very hard.
Very quickly.
It's going to come by very, very quickly. If you're going to recruit now, realistically, how are you going to, even if you get somebody in now, they're not going to start till 6 months out, and they have to build up their reputation, build up their training. So I think it would be better to train somebody in-house for that role.
Okay, very good. So I just want to open up the floor. We have a question over there. Some of you came in a little late. We have two gentlemen with phone. If you can just say your name and your organisation and.
Yeah. My name is Tess Noonan. I work with ISPCC Childline in the voluntary sector. And one of the questions I'd have is, how do we know if we need a DPO? We do process large amounts of information, say in Childline. We could have up to 1,800 contacts per day. Not all of them would be fully identifying information, but it is processing identifiable information. And it's, I suppose, what is a large amount? It's about that question, what is a large amount? That seems large to us, it might be nothing to yourselves, and it's knowing, do we need a DPO within that, the requirements of it, like an independent full-time DPO? And I think it's a question across the voluntary sector, because obviously resources will be different. And also processing is not a core purpose of our function. Obviously we're not selling on data, we keep records to facilitate the client work that we do within that.
So it's an ancillary activity
yes, it is.
to your core activity.
Yeah, like we provide counselling services for children and we keep records.
Oh, and it's for children as well? So
yes, it is. It's ISPC Childline. It's the Irish Society Prevention of Cruelty to Children. And Childline would be the free phone service.
I suppose, yeah, I mean, I think we're kind of getting, I think Paul's getting to the answer there, which is basically your core activities. Is it a core activity? And to your core activity in particular, I would think you are processing sensitive personal data there. And is it a core activity? I think it probably is, personally. A core activity, your ISPC Childline, so you're taking in, you're talking to children and obviously adults as well, and you're taking in their sensitive personal data. And I think it's quite difficult to say that it's ancillary, because you are operating a communication system that's gathering in sensitive personal data from children. I think you need to get, in a sense, I don't want to sound like, but ultimately you need to get independent legal advice on this point, or certainly independent, but to be sure, certainly.
And I think one of the recitals also denotes that if you're dependent on your ancillary activity in order to perform your core activity, then in actual fact you do need a DPO.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Or some sort of DPO
you do.
advice. Yeah.
You need final legal advice, but I'd be moving more to the situation. I do think you probably need a DPO, but you need to get that confirmed by somebody who looks at your entire process.
If I might just put it back to you, think about what a headline might look like in a newspaper next week if there was a breach surrounding the data that you do have, and the sort of reputational effect that might have. And perhaps having a DPO appointed, in order to be able to manage all the privacy stuff that goes on there, the processing and ensuring that there's good data security around it and things like that. You're eliminating your risk and thus avoiding that reputational damage, because I certainly wouldn't want to see something like that in relation to your organisation, because it does such a lot of good work that might be an outcome as a result of maybe not having somebody in a role that's responsible for.
Perfect. Yeah, and that's the answers I was hoping you'd give, looking for that evidence and justification. So, because I would agree with you on that. So that's perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think there was a question over here. There we go. Lady in the back.
Hello, my name is Maria Fitzgerald. I'm from the Teaching Council, and I have a question really around the training that the DPO is required. There's been a lot of talk, and I've been at a number of conferences and summits, and they've all been talking about, the training and certification of the DPO. Have we any guidelines to what standard, what type of training, where is it available, what is the cost, when it rolls out, how long will it take?
Well,
and then we can find somebody who can actually go on it.
Organisation, which is fair enough. I'll let him do that. But I think the simplest thing maybe would be to go to the Data Protection Commissioner's website, and they give. There's a link on there around training. There are a number of organisations now who offer very good data protection training for individuals who are looking to upskill in that space. And they're all recognised as being good privacy courses, and you'll get your certification afterwards, subject to exam or whatever. So I'd say that's certainly one of the places you should go and look. I mean, they'll all vary then in terms of whether it's 1 day, 3 days, or 5 days, and also vary in price. But have a look around there and see what you think.
I have looked at that, and I don't think it really sets the actual standard. If we're talking about needing certified, we need to have a national standard or a European-wide standard. So are you telling me that none exists? Because I don't think the DPC
Well,
guidelines, while they're guidelines,
I wouldn't
they're not
necessarily
adequate.
say that, and that's one of the
Yeah,
challenges around
I think the guidance
yeah.
isn't there just yet, because
Yeah.
I think what we need to bear in mind is that while the GDPR is relatively new for all of yourselves, it is also
Yeah.
extremely new for the regulator.
Yeah.
Now, the regulators have been undergoing, recruitment, training up staff to be ready for the GDPR as well. So this is, it's a journey, I think, for organisations and businesses and citizens as well as the regulators. This is a very new process. So I think, we really need to wait for additional. We do see guidance coming out of the Working Party 29,
Yeah.
which is the European umbrella of all the regulators, because it's very important that they have consistency in their guidance. So obviously they also have to discuss what they think is best in terms of issuing guidance, and they've given guidance on certain areas
Yeah.
so far, but they have yet to issue guidance on training certification. But I think Alan's point is right. I think one of the best protocols is to engage in dialogue with the regulator, because obviously I think the more that people are trained, certified and qualified, the less work it is for the regulator to go out and have to
Yeah.
enforce action. So I think it's a win-win for everybody. So I would personally think starting a dialogue with the regulator is a good protocol or a good first start in any case, to sort of seek some advice in any case, and obviously
Perhaps
look
starting
at the-
there,
yeah.
and maybe when it becomes a little bit more clearer, and if there's a working party opinion published in the coming months around what would be regarded as a certification that's acceptable, maybe then that's where they go after that in their next stage of skilling.
I would imagine, obviously speaking with regulators across Europe, I think one of the overriding feedbacks that I've been getting in any case is that they want to see that organisations are taking steps. I don't think they're necessarily going to judge you for doing a particular training course over another at this particular point in time, but I think what they'd like to see is that organisations are taking the GDPR seriously, and that they're taking data subject rights seriously, and that they're starting to take action within their organisations to become GDPR compliant. I think that's the most important thing. Yes. We have 1, 2 questions over here. There's one over there as well. So 1, 2, and 3. And then,
Hi, I'm TJ McIntyre from Digital Rights Ireland. I have a practical question for the panel regarding the protection for the DPO. So specifically, let's say I am a DPO. I stand up for the rights of the data subjects, and I am penalised or dismissed as a result. Where's my remedy? Where's my remedy? Specifically, in the case that I'm dismissed, this is presumably not an unfair dismissal within Irish law as it stands. It may be a wrongful dismissal, but that will cost me an expensive trip to the Circuit Court or the High Court to find out. If I am penalised falling short of a dismissal, what is my remedy in that case? Are we saying it is a breach of implied terms of my contract of employment following the implementation of the GDPR? And in that case, again, where's my remedy? Where's my low-cost means of getting an effective and dissuasive remedy?
I think Dennis touched a little bit upon this earlier.
Yeah, it's...
maybe you want to elaborate some more.
It is, I think, I understand exactly where you come from, TJ, because this is these are the elements that are not clearly worked out within it. Is the DPO is meant to be somebody with professional qualities, who has all these expertise, but how does that role interact, exactly as you say, with the role of the wider organisation? I mean, to take the opposite situation to the one that you're describing, which is one we can all comprehend from the, I think in a sense, an even more interesting situation, which is one I alluded to, is one of the, say you've a controller who takes data protection very, very seriously, and hires somebody who seems fine, and then discovers that their DPO is not competent, is not, say, cooperating with the Data Protection Commissioner. What happens in that situation, and how do you manage that conflict? And unfortunately, the GDPR doesn't really set that out. I think it'll be very interesting to see how that's worked out in future, because, of course, the GDPR is a regulation, and the Irish state, then, as are all member states, is quite confined in how it can implement that provision at a local level, at a member state level. So yeah, I mean, there The data protection officer is it's in there, and as you know, the GDPR says that they cannot be dismissed as penalised by the controller for performing their tasks. And exactly as you say, what does that mean? And who assesses when a DPO has been dismissed or penalised for performing their tasks? You know, because obviously in the situation you describe, where you might have your DPO who is who feels that he's been dismissed for performing his task, for standing up for the rights of subjects, the controller might say, well, actually, I dismiss them because they never showed up for work. And look, they got in this horrendous row with the Data Protection Commissioner. And, I'm unhappy with their performance at work. Who resolves that question? And I think, as I said, if you go before if you seek the normal employment law remedies, I think you'll be met with a level of mystification, I think, from the normal employment law remedies in that situation. That's an issue that really has to be worked out. And it is quite unfortunate that GDPR didn't really give us any hint as to how that was to be done. But I'm sorry to give the answer, it's a very good question.
Well, I was going to say it might be an interesting case for digital rights.
I think that's
Yeah.
Thanks, TJ. I think there was a lady there who had a question as well. Or is there somebody over there?
I think there's one ready over here, is there?
One over there?
I just wanted to, sorry, Rodney from Vexco. I just wanted to revisit the first question because you addressed core activities, but not the question of interpretation of large-scale processing. There isn't, obviously, not that I'm aware of, any guidance on how to interpret that. What would your approach be? And also, if you were below the threshold, would you still have a DPO given the statutory requirements that would attach to that?
As you say, what does large scale mean? I suppose there is an element of proportionality there. But, the way I always view the GDPR is, I would say, it's a passive-aggressive piece of legislation. You always get to the question of, what do you think? And I think because of the way the legislation is set up, where the controller is accountable for compliance with the GDPR, I think that a risk-averse controller will tend to move towards doing things like appointing a DPO, because in any situation where you have at least then you are demonstrating compliance, which is what you're required to do. So I think, a lot of organisations will find themselves defaulting to the risk-averse position, and in the case of DPO, that may well mean appointing a DPO, because you can't be criticised for appointing a DPO.
No.
So if you're in a situation where it's one or the other, I think you'll go for the appointment.
Okay, thanks. And just to clarify, it would still apply to a data processor as well, the requirement?
Yes,
or
it's
the
data controller or
Well,
processor.
that's a new...
Yeah, it's a co-liability under
introduction,
GDPR. So unlike the predecessing or the predecessor 95 directive,
processors could fall foul of the legislation at the time and not necessarily get sanctioned for it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think we'll have one more question, and then I think we'll have to break because it's just maybe one more. Sorry? Okay. Well, we'll see if there's any more questions afterwards. Don't want to keep everybody from potentially another session. So.
Hi, Cliona Sadler, Rape Crisis Network Ireland. There are about 19,500 registered charities in Ireland, and by almost most of us work with vulnerable people. Most of us are engaged and encountering lots of very sensitive personal data and controlling and processing it. We are also organisations that operate with very little spare capacity. So in terms of building in DPO compliance or GDPR compliance, we have very, very little spare capacity. Our principal relationship is with the vulnerable data subjects. Our second relationship tends to be with the state that funds us to deliver those services. Therefore, our principal risk is the state. And currently there isn't an independent funding line for us to draw from in order to equip ourselves with DPOs. So I wonder if you can have any thoughts on that conundrum.
I'm sympathetic towards your question. I don't know what sort of scope might have been sought for that in terms of derogation on the SI.
I obviously, I'm sympathetic to your situation. On the other hand, you are handling extremely sensitive personal data, and the GDPR then requires you to set up a DPO. And again, we're getting into the situation. I don't want to get into the situation of is it appropriate then to have a DPO? Because I understand the situation. You have the concern about the state getting access to your data when they're providing you funding, that you need to protect it from that. And then if you sort of have, you maybe say, well, maybe we could set up, try to look into having one DPO for a number of different organisations. But is that appropriate either? And the way that the GDPR is set up is you should probably get a DPO. And that is, I realise that's going to be a challenge. But
and a cost for a lot of organisations.
Unfortunately. But given the sensitivity of the data you hold, I'm not sure you'll be able to avoid that.
No, I won't, but the question is where's the funding coming from?
I know. I do understand.
I don't know. I don't know what sort of organisations, multinational or whatever, that are maybe located here that are looking to do some work in a CSR perspective, and maybe might be looking to speak, or you could speak to them if they're happy to maybe help in some way, shape or form, on a voluntary basis. If that was something that could be explored, I don't know, but I think it's I'm very sympathetic to your question for sure. Yeah.
Thanks. Gentleman at the front.
Just a quick one. Sorry, Sean Ormond, Employment Matters. Given the responsibilities that we've spoken about today, throughout the course of the day, what's the reality of the Data Protection Commissioner's office with a staff of 100 people, a budget of 8 million, being able to actually do all of this? And what kind of a staff do they actually need to be able to properly regulate this?
I'd actually like to ask. That's a very interesting. That is another very interesting question, but it's one I think I have an answer to, which is that the supervisory model in the GDPR is it's a very, very clever model. So they took the opposite approach to what they take in, say, Comreg or the Financial Services Centre, where you have a centralised regulator that charges out fees to the entities it regulates for supervision. What they did with the GDPR was they said, instead of us charging you for regulation, we're going to make you regulate yourselves. And the way they are doing that is by making people appoint DPOs. And so, when you say the DPC is a much smaller organisation, that's true. But the idea behind the GDPR is, instead of you getting thousands and thousands and thousands of regulators into the DPC's office, if you were to staff up to the DPC in the same scale, say the central bank, you'd need about 20,000 people there, which is not going to happen. The idea is, instead they make all the supervised entities get DPOs and have their own centralised supervision. So that is the model they're taking. So I think that is the model the GDPR takes. It's going to be very interesting to see does it succeed.
It's true, the DPO is often referred to as a mini regulator position within organisations.
Yeah.
So I think it's
very, very clever. The GDPR is an incredibly clever piece of legislation.
Yeah.
It's very, very smart. They spent a long of time working it up. People are quite critical of it in many ways, but it's very, very clever the way it's done. If the model succeeds, it's I think a model you may see replicated across a number of other areas as well.
Any other questions? There's a lady there. Do you have a microphone? Oh, there's a microphone coming your way, I believe. Are you guys on this one afterwards?
Thanks. I just had
good.
just a very quick question. Sorry, Emer O'Hara, AIB. I just want to ask Dennis your remarks in relation to those interacting with the DPO. Do you see that as compliance staff or more so frontline staff within the business areas, or could it
Who's going to
depend?
interact with the DPO?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how that's structured, because you'll have a DPO function which maybe has somewhere like risk, for example, and they're going to have to interact with the wider organisation. And that's going to be a key issue for the organisations. How do they want to manage that interaction? So do they want, for instance, you might have a DPO and a chief privacy officer or something some people are discussing, where the chief privacy officer would basically interact with the DPO, and that would be a DPO you might be concerned they're in quite an isolated position. I think it's going to be very interesting to see, as we said, as Paul said, the DPO is going to be a mini regulator. As your institution moves forward with this, Will they want to control access? So will they want to control how people interact with the DPO, what they say to the DPO? That's going to be a very interesting thing for bodies to work out as to how they're going to do this. It's part of the challenge. That's why I don't think it's just about recruiting somebody. You need to work out before you recruit them where you're going to put them and what their job is going to be. What's their purpose? What are they going to be doing? So it's part of the challenge.
Alan, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, it's really all those points that Dennis have said. It's just your organisation is going to have to do a sort of risk assessment now on what way you want this to work, where it's best fit to put it, and the sort of person that you need, the sort of skill set. When it comes to working with others in the organisation, or certainly in my own experience working with the Commissioner's office as well, if you have a good relationship builder,
Yeah.
that's really good.
I think that's key.
Yeah, that's key, because you can get things done internally, but you can also get things done, with the regulator, as well. So it's,
Depending on the regulator.
well, that's true. That's true. That's true.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're done for time there. So I'd like to thank everybody. I hope the session was useful for you all. Thank you for your engagement. Thank you for your contributions. And